So thanks everyone for moving this back and forth very quickly. It is a pleasure to welcome Secretary Ray LaHood, Secretary of the Department of Transportation, and Secretary Shaun Donovan, Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to our little confab today, though this is being webcast and live on Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest of it. I couldn't think of two better people, really, to sort of close out this session, because the conversation that we've been having this morning is post-recession. How do we think not just about creating more jobs in the United States to make up for the jobs we lost, not just to create better jobs so that for millions more Americans they get jobs that have better wages, better benefits, but how do we create jobs that people can actually get to within a reasonable time, particularly on transit, given rising gas prices? And our group at Brookings has taken on this heroic act of looking at literally billions of daily trips in the United States, 500 gigabytes of data, 100 metropolitan areas, 371 transit agencies, 2 staff hospitalized. And what they have found, I think, is really quite interesting. As we've worked with your teams at HUD and Transportation, there's some really good news coming out of this. A large share of metropolitan residents have access to transit, 70% across the top 100 metros. But only about 30% of metropolitan residents have access to jobs, given this broad decentralization and sprawling development patterns that we have in the US, and these sort of legacy systems of transit, whether it's rail or even, frankly, bus, built back in the 50s. With rising gas prices, with the environmental imperative, and with this real jobs deficit we have, the focus on accessibility and the focus on transit seems like it's finally come into the fore. We have the stars aligned. So, Secretary, I'm going to start with you. Is this a public transit moment? Given all these disparate kind of trends, and given the real hard choices people have to make now with gas prices and commutes, will we see a shift to transit? Is transit ready? How do you think about these issues taken together?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Brookings. I don't have a better partner in the cabinet than Shaun Donovan. Almost from the first day that he and I were both sworn in, we have been working collaboratively together. We've traveled together. We've put our money where our mouth is. We've combined our resources. And I think it's been good for America for us to do that. Another one of our partners has been Lisa Jackson. But Shaun and I have really worked together, collaborating on our Tiger grants and on our budgets. And actually, it was his idea. He had called me and he wanted to come over and test our kitchen out at DOT. So in doing that, he said, we need to work together. And from that day, we have. And I also want to thank Brookings because I know that you all work very closely with Polly Trottenberg and Roy Kienitz, and you've been great partners. You really have. I don't think there's, I have a great partner here, but we also have great partners with you guys. I think this about transit. We've made, if you look at the stimulus money that we received, we've made huge investments in transit. Some in the traditional transit, but there's a lot of communities around America that want to get in the streetcar business. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of places in America that want to get in the light rail business. And when we look at the investments that we've made, either through Tiger, through transit, and then if you include high-speed intercity rail. And when I talk about high-speed, I also talk about high-speed intercity rail. There has to be connectivity. And I think Americans are going to rely on transit as gasoline prices go up because it's affordable, but accessibility is also very important. I was just in Detroit announcing a high-speed rail program with the governor, but Mayor Bing was there. And what Mayor Bing is doing, with our help, he's trying to persuade people to come back to Detroit. But he knows if he does that, there has to be affordable housing and good transit. I think this is the time for cities like Detroit. I've talked to Ram a lot. He gets sworn in next Monday.
Right.
As the mayor of Chicago. He's talked to both of us. As a matter of fact, one evening when I was going to Shaun's house for dinner, my phone rings as I'm walking up the steps, and of course it's Ram, my daily call with Ram. Wanted to know if I still had his red line money and his transit money and all this. And I said, here, talk to Shaun Donovan. And he did, and he gave Shaun an assignment.
Public housing money.
But I think Ram is thinking a lot. I mean, he has talked to me a lot about transit. He gets it. So it is a transit moment, thanks to some of the good work you all have done, but also thanks to the stimulus program, our partnership with HUD, and really listening to people. High gasoline prices haven't hurt us. As long as they stay as high as they are, people are going to be looking for alternatives.
Let me ask you this question, and before I turn to Shaun. Hear a lot about high-speed rail. Hear a lot about light rail.
Right.
Hear a lot about commuter rail. In most of the systems that we looked at, buses are the main mode, and it's almost like buses are like the Rodney Dangerfield of the transit system. They just get no respect. Now, a lot of systems are thinking about bus rapid transit off the Latin America model. How do you think about the role of buses in the context of a broader transit system?
Yeah, I look at buses are here to stay. The only people that don't like buses are people that are driving cars behind them and get stuck behind them. There are a lot of working people. There are a lot of people who college students. There are a lot of people in America that like buses because they deliver them to work, to school, to play, all over their communities. I don't know that we've heard that much complaint about buses, but we have heard more emphasis on light rail and on streetcars. And so we've put some resources into that because we have been listening to mayors and people in the communities that are trying to plan for transportation. America will always have buses. We always have and we always will. Because they deliver people where they want to go at a cost that they can afford.
Secretary Donovan, in some ways that's a perfect segue because when we look at these statistics across the country and why certain metros, particularly the western metros, perform so well, it's not really just about the capacity or competence of the transit system. It's about the broader growth patterns and the broader development patterns. The West is different from other parts of the country because at the end of the day, you hit a mountain, you hit a desert. I won't talk about water for now, but you basically run into things. You can't keep sprawling as we do in other parts of the country. Plus, there's more of an ethic of collaboration in many of these Western metros across housing, transit, land use, jobs. You and Secretary LaHood have really been very vocal and articulate about the need to break down the silos between housing, transport, commerce, so that we deliver more organically smart, strategic, metropolitan growth. Could you talk about that vision and how it might be affected by this report?
Absolutely, and let me just start by echoing Ray. We've not only gotten great work together, we've actually had a lot of fun doing it. We've gone on the road. Lisa Jackson, Ray, and I did a tour. I think we have the black concert T-shirts from it, and I'll tell you, this guy's a rock star in this world. It was amazing to see. Ray told me very honestly, there are not that many things you can get done in the time that we have. This is one of the things I want to get done, and we've worked on it together, and I do feel like we've made progress because it's been such a great partnership. So, and the highest compliment I could pay Bruce is that, and to say thank you to Brookings, is that when we came in fresh, you got maybe 2 or 3 people at the beginning of the administration running the entire department. We stole Bruce and borrowed him from Brookings for about 3 months, and there's no higher compliment I could give that this is a person who and an institution at Brookings who understands these issues like nobody else in the country. And so I just want to thank you once again. We're celebrating today, I think, the leadership of Brookings on this. So I think, to me, you asked if we're at a public transit moment. I think we're also at a metro moment. And it's interesting, when you look back 50 years, metropolitan dynamics were about cities versus suburbs, right? And what you have in the West, and maybe I think in the East, and maybe your report shows not quite as much in the South, but hopefully we're getting there. I was in Atlanta this week with the mayor, and they get it, is that dynamic has reversed. And what you started to see is a fundamental recognition that if you don't have that cooperation, you're going to lose the economic race, right? I mean, the president talks about we're going to win the future. You're only going to do that if you have a strong metro. 90 cents of every dollar in this country is produced by the metros. And that is a fundamental shift that we're seeing. And I think, I worked for Mayor Bloomberg for 5 years. He got this in a very fundamental way. This was all about economics to him, and the long-term economic success of the New York Metro was, look, we're in a world where we've gone from people following capital and industry to industry and capital following people to the places they want to be. And in a world where, 52 cents of every dollar the American family spends goes to just housing and transit combined, people want to be in places where they can get to work, and Ray's eloquent on this, where, they can walk to the corner and see a movie or get on a bike, or, they're not going to get rid of their car, but they want options and quality of life. And more, the most successful metro areas, Denver, others, you've seen these suburbs saying, how do I get in? How do I get my light rail? How do I get onto the system? How do I connect? Because they recognize that you're going to be left behind in an economic race if you're not getting on board. So I really do think we have a moment of opportunity to see, and this is what our Sustainable Communities Partnership is about. Metropolitan planning grants, putting our money together and saying, hey, we want to help you realize that vision. This wasn't like we had to force the money on them. It was $1 billion of demand for $170 million in grants to do exactly that kind of planning to bring these metros together.
Can I just, let me just, 3 examples. Shaun and I and Lisa went to Dubuque, Iowa. That's a pretty small community. It's a college, it has 3 colleges there. IBM decided to relocate and hire 1,500 people. These are going to be very smart young people. So we made a Tiger grant to them to leverage some, and this is going to be in downtown Dubuque, bringing people back down. Now, Dubuque is not that big, but they're bringing people back downtown. They have a Milltown area that was used to do milling work. They've turned it into condominiums. So these people, 1,500 people, when they come to Dubuque, they'll find affordable housing. We gave them some Tiger money for transportation, and IBM is bringing these people into Dubuque. So that's one example. We gave a Tiger grant to Kansas City, Missouri, about $40 or $50 million. Affordable housing money, that our money is going to be used for streetscape, things we take for granted, sidewalks, and there's also going to be transit. So people can go back into this 150-block area. They'll have good transportation, either buses or other forms of transportation. They'll have affordable housing, and they'll have the ability to go back to a neighborhood where many of them grew up. But for whatever reason, it was blighted. And I mentioned Detroit. Shaun has been working closely with the mayor. So have I. We gave them, there's a Woodward Avenue project. We're going to create a Woodward Avenue corridor. And with affordable housing money, some transit money, people will start coming back to Detroit, hopefully where their jobs are. Where we also, by the way, thanks to the president, made a huge investment in the American automobile manufacturers, GM and Chrysler, who both posted first quarter profits. So it doesn't get any better. And it's just, it is a time for us to really think about, where we're at with transit, and but also with housing, and also with other transportation options.
So let me follow up with both of you on this question, because I fundamentally agree it's a metro moment. that's almost the driving purpose of the program we have here at Brookings. Now, when we look at the data for the top 100 metros in the US, what we see is the positive economic performance, and we see, incredible shares, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95% of the nation in terms of the critical assets we have to move forward. What we also see are these trends around major employment decentralization. The cities, and it varies, the cities are seeing some resurgence, particularly in places like Detroit, around that downtown and the corridor to the medical center and the universities. But a large portion of the jobs are 10 miles away from the central business district. And the major challenge, to some extent, that we're seeing in this report is a lot of our transit systems built in the 50s, whether they're rail or bus, are hub and spoke. And they don't quite get to the suburb-to-suburb commute, or particularly the older suburb to newer suburb commute, given poverty concentration in some of the older suburbs, employment sprawl in some of the newer suburbs. So we have to retrofit these 50, 60 systems for a radically different kind of century. There's no doubt in my mind what has been going on in the administration, particularly into the Recovery Act, has started us down the road towards that retrofit. The question is, how do we accelerate it? How do we leverage up the private sector investment? So it's public transit for sure, but then different modes of private sector provision, whether it's ride sharing or some of the corporate transit systems we see in Seattle and elsewhere. So I think the question is, given that we have these broad trends that we've inherited really from the past century, we're trying to shift to a very different ethic of development, more integrated, less compartmentalized. But how do we respond to what are these vast, what is essentially a spatial mismatch between where particularly poor, low-income, moderate-income skilled people work and where so many of the jobs are being created? Do we have all the tools we need? How do we engage governors, mayors, county leaders in the private sector to go even further than perhaps we've gone so far? Simple question, right? I mean, this is Brookings.
And I could certainly jump in on this. And I think there are a lot of lessons to learn in what started to happen on the housing front, right? Because this is all about connecting housing to jobs, right? Where you live and where you work, and how do we make sure that there are quick, easy ways to get between the two, right? And I think, and Shelley Petich is here, who runs our Sustainable Housing Communities program, created Reconnecting America, done an amazing job, I think, on driving a transit-oriented development agenda, which really started on housing. And it was already moving, I think, very well. Ironically, I think this housing crisis that we faced has focused the market even more on this. And what I mean by that is, you look at the places that have been hardest hit in terms of loss in value, it's the places that are least connected to transportation. In fact, the DART system is a very good example in Dallas, where it did a study that shows houses near transit held their value by 25% better than houses that were disconnected. And so you have a very fundamental economic rationale for connecting housing and transit that has begun to drive the market in much more fundamental ways. I don't think we're quite there on the economic argument. I think this is why this report is so important, is that we've got to build the data, the evidence that in fact connecting jobs makes them more attractive, to transit makes them more attractive, helps broadly the city, the metro do better, those suburbs do better. I think we're starting to get there. I think one of the real barriers to this is that mixed-use development is hard. Having done this in New York, worked very closely with our city planning department, our economic development corporation, it is much simpler to have zoning codes that segregate these uses. It is much easier to finance, single use. We have this in FHA. We've quintupled our volume in our multifamily programs. We don't know how to underwrite commercial. And so we're trying to do more mixed use, the environmental, the whole set of things that are barriers. But this is, again, where our sustainable communities funding is so important. We're literally, at a time when city and state budgets are falling apart, we're literally funding the planning of, mixed-use TOD development, the zoning that needs to happen, and providing the technical assistance. I can't tell you, when we were in New York doing this, how many mayors would come to us and say, you know what, I'd love to do this. I don't know how. I don't have the technical capacity in my planning department. I don't have the ability to really figure out how to change the zoning laws. And then you get to the politics of it, right? And you say we want to put 40-story buildings or 20-story buildings. You're going to run into those barriers. So it does take time and capacity. We have to lay the groundwork for this, and I think that's really what we're trying to do with this Sustainable Communities Partnership.
But I think what is so interesting is you start with the market dynamics and what we've experienced with decline in value in some of the low-density, decentralized areas, where we've seen an uptick in value in places that actually do have access. So the question, I think, over time is, can the norms and standards and behavior of the market begin to respond to this? Transit, obviously, I mean, in a way, what you've done, you've made collaboration a natural act at the federal level.
I'm not sure it would feel natural to some of our folks working together. It's not easy, and our teams, I mean, Ray, teams coming back to us saying, oh man, your data system doesn't talk to our data. I mean, there are lots of barriers, just like there are to the, but it has gained a lot of momentum, and I appreciate you saying that.
So let me ask you this question about, this is going to sound really boring, right? But we're at Brookings, so, data. Rob and I were just in Tokyo. This is about 3 weeks before the earthquake. And, you get on your handheld, and you basically can get any piece of information you want about the performance of the transit system, which is a multimodal transit system. Obviously, a much more dense and compact country and a much more dense and compact metropolis. But transparency is the order of the day. And accessibility, not just home to work, but accessibility to information is the order of the day. We are the country at the vanguard of information technology. But when we go abroad, it's pretty embarrassing in some respects as to, city by city, metro by metro. We don't really have this information at our fingertips. And we still watch the 6 o'clock news in the morning to say, okay, bottleneck on this, or don't use that trans. How do we begin to up our game in a way of data collection, data integration, data accessibility, so that, I mean, since we all live on these things, we can improve our own efficiency, so to speak. We can experience the city and the metro in such a more reliable and efficient way. Is that going to be a government push, or does that have to be really a public-private partnership of major proportions that we haven't seen?
It has to be both. No, some of the leadership does have to come from people in elective office and people in appointed office, and some of it has to be top down and some of it can be bottom up. I was so struck when I was in Japan by the fact that you can, you buy your ticket for your rail.
That's right.
And then you go through and you scan your BlackBerry or phone or whatever, and you go through, that's how you get through the turnstile. And then when you're on the train, you can see what food they have to serve, and when they come by to serve you the food, they scan your device again to pay for it. And so, I know exactly what you're saying, and we need that kind of innovation here, and some of it has to come from some of us. I mean, if you look at what we've done in the last 2.5 years in terms of collaboration and innovation and just working together, that was unheard of prior to 2.5 years ago. But some of it has to come from the bottom up, too. I mean, it does have to be a collaborative effort. There's no question about it.
And let me build on this, because we're not obviously directly involved in the data around the transit systems. But I think there's a broader point here that connects back to last discussion, which is for private capital really to efficiently move to support this stuff. If we're going to get companies and jobs moving at a higher pace toward transit to those locations, and vice versa, sort of retrofitting our systems to get to those jobs. We need to have reliable, consistent information that can help drive those decisions. And on the housing front, I mean, take a simple issue, right? Average American family spends 52 cents of every dollar they earn on just housing and transportation. Yet when you go to underwrite a mortgage, you don't ever look at how much somebody spends on transportation. And we've tried this before. There have been kind of location-efficient mortgages. A huge part of the barrier is, well, how do I know reliably what the cost of transportation is for this family that lives in this house? And look, there's human behavior. It's going to vary, but there's human behavior on what you do with your paycheck, right? And so we can get over those issues, but we haven't had a reliable national. And are there going to be companies that are going to do that? Yes, but I think us really making sure there's a standard at the federal level, getting that information. So one of the things Shelley's been working on with the team, we had $10 million, and we're trying to create a housing and transportation affordability index that could literally cover every part of the country. And without that, you're just not going to get capital driving in those directions. So I think there's a larger lesson here of a way we could use this data.
Let me just talk about transit for a second here. We've made investments in companies that are making totally green buses. The bus is totally green. So when people say, what's a green job? And you go to the place that I was in South Carolina where there's 225 people, those are green jobs. They're making totally green buses. Then we encourage transit systems to buy the green buses that are burning natural gas but are also totally green. The investments we've made in streetcars, because streetcars are made in America now. So we made an investment in Atlanta, in Tucson, Arizona, for a streetcar that will deliver people from the university to downtown in Atlanta, across the entire historic district of Atlanta, and in New Orleans where they have streetcars, but we've made investments there. Many of these streetcars are made in Portland, Oregon, by American workers, and they're very clean burning. And so, you know, we can leverage some of our opportunities, but also then encourage people in communities to take advantage of the opportunity for cleaner burning buses, streetcars, light rail, from some of the investments that we have made. And that's to my point of driving it from the top, but also then encouraging it from the communities. And you know, Denver, which has had one of the most innovative, creative mayors who is now governor, the kind of system that he created there, which is now in your statistics and your data from your report show that, you know, there's so much good transportation in Denver all the way out to Kingdom Come to get to the airport. And all those trains now coming into Denver Station. So it goes to your point about some of it can be done here, but some of it has to be out in the communities.
It strikes me, though, just the language both of you are using. You know, transit 15, 20 years ago would probably be talked about almost as a service. You know, no different than other municipal services that might be provided by a city or by a metropolitan area. What you're basically describing are smart investments, some very low cost, like the data, that catalyze markets, that change market behavior, that ultimately create more jobs, more value, given how we arrange our metropolitan areas. That's a very different kind of conversation. I would say many metros have come to that conversation, but for a long time the federal government was more siloed and compartmentalized and so forth. So in some ways, as we talk about the jobs deficit and the economic recovery, we've got to bring these agencies right smack in the middle of it, both so people can get to work, but we could also catalyze different kind of economic growth going forward.
Can I just say one thing about our budget? The president's 5-year plan for transportation has a 127% increase in transit funding.
Right.
So the president gets it. And that's going to be a huge investment. And we also changed the formula in hard economic times for allowing transit districts to use some of the money for operating.
Perfect.
We go from being able to use 25% to 15 to 10 in hard economic times. So we get it on. So again, it has to come from the communities, but it also has to come from us listening and responding to.
I also think, Bruce, it's a fundamental point, right? I mean, proposing a big increase today in transit funding, there are going to be a lot of people say, we can't afford to do this right now, right? The answer has to be, we can't afford not to do this because the costs of falling behind,
Right.
the cost, frankly, and this is a lot of what really drove the Sustainable Communities Partnership, the cost of putting housing and jobs in the wrong place relative to transportation is huge. Not just in, environmental costs, not just in out of people's, pocketbooks in terms of what they're spending on their commutes, but economic growth costs over the long term. But we can't make that argument unless you at Brookings are doing these reports, and all of you are helping us make that argument, because, it's one thing for two cabinet secretaries, as convincing as we are to say it. It's another thing for everybody out in their communities, constituents, having real hard information that says, 1 + 1 isn't 2 here when you invest smartly. It's 1 + 1 = 3.